I'll move on to our second presenter, who's Dr. Deng Palomares from the University of British Columbia, because we've heard from Yannick a lot about where the effort in fisheries is being applied, and that's important. But of course, the second important facet to understand what's going on is to get a sense of where a catch is actually coming from and who is catching fish and where. So Deng, one of the best independent sources of this we have is, of course, the Sea Around Us database, which builds on official information, but also adds to it estimates of what might be illegal or unreported fishing. So it provides, I think, the best kind of academic, independent, scientific estimate we have of the actual levels of catch that are being taken from the ocean. So would you like to walk us through, Deng, what the database tells us about those levels of catch now?
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good morning for some, and good afternoon for some. Let me just share my screen and run the PowerPoint. Are you seeing my PowerPoint now?
Yes, it looks perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Okay. So my name is Maria Deng Palomares. I come from the Sea Around Us research initiative at the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries, the University of the British Columbia. For me, it's about 10:30 in the evening because I'm now sitting in the Philippines. I'm on a mission in the Philippines. So this is going to be this presentation is giving you some global trends of catches that were obtained from the Sea Around Us databases. Now, just to give you an idea of where you can get this data outside, from our website, you can go through to the website and then click on the tools and data link, and then you can do searches by specific geographic entities, which is for us the EEZ Marine Ecoregion RFMO high seas, the global catches by FAO area and by fishing country. The catch trends that we have so far in our database are from 1950 to the near present, which is for this version 2019. So it's from 1950 to 2019. And the catches are provided in different dimensions. So you can get the catch trend by taxon, by commercial groups, by functional groups, by fishing country, by gear and the use fishing sector, catch type, reporting status, and data layer. Now, just to show you where exactly you would do. So this is the landing page of the Sea Around Us. Tools and data is your first link on the left side of that blue bar, the menu. And when you click on that, you're then given the choice of which geographic region you would like to look into. So most often it is by EEZ, and but sometimes if you want to look at the global catch data, you can also look at that and investigate the trend by global of the global catch in all of the oceans of the world. So that's in a nutshell how it works. If there is anything from the website that you do not see, you're welcome to come and ask me where to get them from. So the first thing is looking at the global catch of all maritime countries in the world by continent. You see that the global catch is taken, a big chunk of it in Asia, and then you have Europe and the Americas, and very little of it is taken from Africa and Oceania. The top 15 fishing fleets of all of these maritime countries make up almost 67% of the global catch. And this is topped by China And the first 5 largest fishing fleets actually make up just a little under 50%. So of the global catch. You can see some Southeast Asian countries that have made it to the top 15, which is normal because most of the catch is actually in Southeast Asian countries. The global catch by development status of WTO members countries are mostly taken by developing WTO member countries, and developed, that's the second will be the developed WTO member countries, and very little is taken by the LDCs and non-WTO members. Big chunk developing countries. Now, the catch by maritime areas is again dominated within the taken within domestic EEZs, and only 15%, or just a little over 15%, is taken in foreign EEZs. Now, the global catch of taken within domestic EEZs is actually taken by fleets of developing and LDC WTO members. That's almost 60% being taken by developing and LDC WTO members. In the foreign EEZs, the catches are taken mostly by developing WTO members. And in the high seas, very little, there's only 2.5% that's taken in the high seas. And that is, well, there's no real trend, but you can see that the LDCs actually do not have much contribution to that catch. The top 15 fleets in RFMOs make up 60, just a little over 60% of the global catch within the RFMOs. Now then again, it is topped by China, and the first 5 countries make up about 30% of that global catch. Right. Oh, I wanted to say that you will notice that this has changed, that the countries, the fleets have changed if you compare this to the fleets that are topping it in all of the global catch. The global catch by sector is taken mostly by industrial fishing fleets. Now, I have given you a definition of the sectors that the sea around us uses for our purposes. But so industrial fisheries mean that these are consisting mostly of relatively large motorized vessels, and therefore large scale fish fleets that would be landing a catch that is overwhelmingly sold commercially. Now, all of the gears in this industrial sector are being dragged or towed across the seafloor or intensively through the water column using engine power, no matter the size of the vessel. Thus, a 3-ton vessel, if applying trawl, is considered an industrial fleet. Artisanal fleets are consisting of small-scale vessels and fixed gears landing a catch that is predominantly commercial and assumed to operate within domestic waters. That would be limited to the coast to a maximum of 50 kilometers or to 200 meters depth, whichever comes first. Subsistence fisheries is consisting of fisheries that's often conducted by women and or non-commercial fishers for the consumption by one's family. And recreational fisheries is consisting of fisheries conducted mainly for pleasure. Note that official fishery statistics would most often be only consisting of industrial fisheries. And therefore the sea around us adds on top of it adds value by adding artisanal, subsistence, and recreational fishing. So I was going to say that industrial fisheries, 70%, that's a large chunk of the global catch. And of that industrial industrial catch, developing and LDC members represent 47%. Now, of that 47%, 14.3 are taken in the domestic inshore fishing area. The subsistence and artisanal fisheries take up 27% of that global catch, and this is taken, 22.1% is taken by developing and LDC member fleets, and of that, this occurs 15, almost 16% occurs in the domestic inshore fishing area. I think this is my last slide, which was the most, yes, that's my last slide. Thank you.
Super, Dang, thank you very much. That's really helpful. I have just two questions of clarification. So apologies, guys. I'm going to change my methodology here. And there's a question also for you from in the Q&A chat. Dang, I had two questions. Firstly, can you explain why, as I read it on your second to last slide, which was the sectors and is going to take me some time to absorb, you said, I think that you defined any vessel that used towed gears, so towing across the seafloor, or towing through the water column, sort of in an intensive way. Any of that you consider to be industrial, and I'd be interested in why. I think I can guess the answer, but I'd like to know from you. And the second question was, you talked about the inshore fishing area, and this is a specific data point that I know we have asked you to present in the past, and we've asked you to focus on that again because it is a specific maritime area that the UBC only, I think, uses, and it's not the territorial sea, and it's not the contiguous zone, and it's not the EEZ. So I just wondered if you could explain how you define it and why you use it, like why is it important? And then the very last question, if you don't mind, if I can put all three of you to you at the same point. The question in the Q&A is, you mentioned the fact that official statistics are often industrial, or often mainly industrial. And the question, I think, just asks you to confirm and clarify. As written, it says, does that mean the FAO statistics are mainly industrial catch and not artisanal? And this is an important methodological point as we try and understand what your data adds to the official data that we all know well that comes out of the FAO. So the towed gear question, the inshore fishing area question, and then the artisanal, then kind of the UBC versus the FAO catch statistics and how they're different.
Yeah. So towing, that's actively pursuing fish. It's not waiting for the fish to come to you. It's actively pursuing fish. And most of the time, this is usually trawling. So, and it really gets everything in that path. So this basically, the fish has no escape. So if you had a ball, if you had a school, right, of fish, you will get all of that, and that wipes out one population. Yeah. So if especially big schools, right? And so you're towing and you're getting all of it, wiping out the whole thing. And that is not passive. That is really active fishing, looking for things. And most of the time, this these are technology wise, what Yannick was discussing earlier.
Mm.
The technology helps the fishers look for that ball, look for that
Mhm.
ball, that solid ball of the school of fish.
Mhm.
And then so that school of fish will have all sorts of of life stages
Mm.
in that ball. And if you have, so it wipes out the breeders as well as the juveniles that will still need to become breeders, right?
Mhm.
But
Okay.
that's taking everything out. So it is more um, destructive in a way,
Mm.
because yeah, you're wiping out one whole population.
Okay. And so in your
Yeah.
judgment, that justifies considering it to be artisanal. Sorry, considering it to be
No, industrial and
industrial.
most, yeah, industrial.
Mhm.
Mm, and if you have a big boat,
Mm.
um, that can drag, so you need lots of power to
Mhm.
drag that net through the water column or through the
Mm.
bottom. Yeah, and so
Okay.
this is power, and that
Mhm.
is large scale. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That helps me.
And the
The
second
inshore
thing,
fishing. Yeah.
yes,
What's that
inshore
all about?
fishing. So the inshore fishing area. So yeah, most there was talk about the territorial seas
Mm.
that is at 7 nautical miles from the shore. The inshore fishing area is 50 kilometers from the shore, or 200 meters when you hit 200 meters of the depth from the shoreline.
Mhm.
Now, so why is that? It's because this is where artisanal fishers most likely would have access to, right?
Mhm.
So it will be the zone of operation, usually by artisanal fishing
Mhm.
boats.
Mhm.
And normally, um, the territorial, the 7 nautical miles zone, you're not supposed to fish there with active or even passive fishing gears. So the seven
Mm.
nautical miles thing um, is supposed to be for subsistence fishers, I think. If we follow the sense of what sustainable fishing fisheries is. So if
Mhm.
you so the 50-kilometer limit that we think is where most artisanal small scale fishing would happen, and then
Mhm.
anything above that uh, distance would be dominated by industrial fishing.
Mhm.
And that's the hypothesis, which is what we've seen on the ground as well.
Okay. Well, that's important.
Mhm.
Maybe for the negotiators listening, just before you get to the last question, for the negotiators listening, I think for me, the value of having Deng's catch data divided down by inshore fishing area is that, at least as far as we are aware, it is the closest thing we have. Well, it is, so the EEZ limit and the inshore territory, sorry, the inshore fishing area limit are the two geographical areas that we have some data for, at least in terms of catch.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing, it's, as far as I'm aware, there's no catch statistic that measures fishing closer to the shore than the UBC inshore fishing area. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's the most granularity I guess we can give you, that science can give you, about where the catch happens between the high seas, the EEZ, and something within the EEZ. So just to explain why we present the data and why we think it's helpful, maybe. There was one last question, Ding, and it was about the difference, kind of the, is there a, I guess the implication is there a bias, a natural bias in the FAO statistics towards data from industrial fisheries versus artisanal? And
Yeah.
how do you try and correct for that bias?
So the FAO statistics mostly, I would say, would be industrial fish, and
Mm.
they do not the FAO statistics are not distinguished between the sectors. So you have one full thing. And in most of the countries, when we compare the national statistics with the FAO statistics, we often see that the industrial catch makes up most of the FAO statistics. Now that is normal. That is normal because the industrial fisheries would be the most reported.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is normal. And artisanal fishery is very difficult to get the statistics because the small scale fishers really will not be reporting the catch. And this is a trend. We know that this happens, right? So now the sea around us, then in a way, we look at the FAO statistics, we look at the national statistics, and we compare. The difference that we get, like assuming that the FAO statistics is mostly, say, 80 to 90% industrial fishing catch. So any difference that we see or that we detect with the national statistics would be something that we can use to establish what is the percentage of artisanal fishing.
Okay.
What is the percentage of artisanal catch? And we use this the results of this comparison to determine how much we need to add on to the FAO statistics to
Estimate.
reconstruct the artisanal catch. On top of that, we do a different sort of study for looking at subsistence fishing. So subsistence fishing does not figure in most countries, doesn't figure in the reports at all, because it is not sold, it is consumed directly by the fishers, right? So there are countries where you will have really good data, but there are countries where there's really nothing. And what we try to look into would be a report of, let's say, what is the percentage of the population living in the coastline, and what the percentage of fishers are in this population, fishers per se. And then we do this everything by percentages. It's all an estimation, and we try to look at the demographics and which part of that demographics is or would likely be doing subsistence fishing. And then with all of that calculation, then we add that on top of what we already know for industrial and artisanal fishing. And then we look into recreational fishing and the similar pattern of doing this. How many we know recreational fishing is actually interesting because you have records of tournaments, you have pictures of people saying this is our trophy fish, right? So anywhere where there is a record of a tournament or pictures of trophy fishes, we then know that in that EEZ recreational fishing is happening. And then we dig the resources in, yeah. And especially if there is at tournaments, it's very easy to find out because all of the catches are recorded.
Right.
And then so we add that on to the statistics again. So it takes quite a lot of digging for additional data sources for us to be able to do that. Yeah.
Very interesting. There is one last question, I think, in the chat for you. And it's a question, is there any analysis between the catch of the country and its population? Because it seems reasonable, as written here, for some countries to have a larger catch to feed, for some of them, a huge population. And interestingly, in Yannick's presentation, he added this comparison of some countries that had effort versus the size of their EEZs.
Mhm.
Does your analysis include any of that kind of comparison or not yet?
Oh, it's going to be difficult for us to do this because we use the population, the demographics, as I was saying earlier, to estimate subsistence fishing. So we don't want to be circular in any of our estimations. And so if we did this analysis, there will be a form of bias.
Okay. Yeah.
And if we could do it, we could do it for countries where we have not used the demographics. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. So I think perhaps the answer to the question is not by UBC because of the nature of how they are trying to estimate kind of what is official and what is perhaps unreported and how do we get a bigger picture. And because they use population statistics to do that, they can't then compare it to the population. Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think that analysis should be sort of relatively easily done, right?
Yes.
With official data sources.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I saw a hand come up and then it came down again, which is okay. You're not obliged to take the floor if you don't have to.
There was a question about FAO is supposed to be based on the national statistics if they have the data. Why not report? The FAO statistics are taken from the reports of the countries, and we do not know how countries choose to report what they report to the FAO. But there are discrepancies. The national statistics, if you look at them, we've been doing this for since now over 20 years, and this sort of analysis for comparing FAO with the national statistics, and we haven't actually seen except for Oman. Oman is very good with statistics, and of course the northern countries and in Europe, they're also good with the statistics. But in cases for some countries in Southeast Asia or in Africa, there is that discrepancy. We don't know why. So but we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we have the correct statistics, that we're basing our reconstructions on the correct statistics.
Okay. This is where we come up against the limits of what is known about fisheries, and it's a sector where we bump up against those limits quite quickly, I find.
Yes.
Okay. I think, Deng, you've done fantastically well at answering the questions we've had so far. It is late in Manila. Thank you for joining us. If you would like to stay on, you're very welcome to. But again, if you would like to go and sleep, I completely understand.
I'm going to stay on. I want to listen to Anna and Ernesto.
Okay, super. Well, so we might have Deng for a little bit longer in case there's a question later. So with that perfect introduction, so we've covered global effort with Yannick's presentations, and we've seen kind of how focused it is on domestic EEZs, what a large role developing countries play in that, which is natural. We've seen from Deng kind of how the different catch sectors divide up, and essentially kind of from their reconstructions, who is fishing in which areas, at least by looking at catch statistics. And that's all useful. That's all gives us a sense of the actual activity that these negotiations are about. But the other big part of the activity that we're meant to be talking about in these negotiations is, of course, the subsidies, right? These rules are not about disciplining fishing. They are about disciplining the subsidies that governments provide to that fishing. So the effort and the catch I find useful to get a scale of what activity is out there. But at the end of the day, this is a negotiation about subsidies. And the best global estimate we have of subsidies is, of course, the data from UBC. So I might now turn to you, Anna. You're a postdoctoral researcher now back at UBC. And your database dividing up subsidies into industrial and artisanal has been one of the sort of fundamental pieces of work that I think have motivated a lot of this negotiation. So I'd like to give you the floor next to walk us through what that data says again.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm trying to start my video, but it won't let me. I don't know if I need to enable it or something.
You'll be enabled in just a moment. I think
Okay.
might be able to help with that.
And sorry, here we go.
There you are.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for having me. And should I just start sharing my screen and dive right into it?
Yeah, dive right into it. Go ahead.
Oh, so now this is weird. So you're just seeing my, not the full screen, right?
Correct. I think.
Yeah, okay.
If you go up to...
No, I think I just have to disconnect my other monitor. Otherwise it'll do this like little thing here. Sorry about that. One second. Okay. Let's try again.
Just while Anna puts her slides up again, to let everyone know, the reason that we decided to run this as a complete webinar is that we have Yannick in Japan, Deng in Manila, and Anna in Vancouver, and we are all, well, some of us at least are here in Europe. So there was absolutely no way that we could make this work other than as a webinar. But super, Anna, now we see your slides perfectly. So go ahead, please.
Okay, yes. So my name is Anna Schubauer, and Alice already introduced me, and I'm at the Fisheries Economic Research Unit at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And yeah, it's 7 in the morning here, so I think I may be more lucky than 12 p.m. on a Friday night. But yeah, so it's just getting light here. And here in Canada, when we give presentations, we always acknowledge the unceded territories of the First Nations we live on. And so I currently live on the Sechelt and the Squamish territories. And yeah, so today I'm giving you an overview of the global and the World Trade Organization relevant fisheries subsidies. And this work has been at UBC with Rashid Soumaila, been going on for about 20 years now too. So we've been building on the data sets and the information we've been gathering since the early 2000s. And so here's just the global fishery subsidies. So what we do in our estimates, usually we divide the total subsidies into 3 main categories, and they're the beneficial, ambiguous, and capacity enhancing subsidies. And these are the data from our latest estimate, which we updated in 2019. And on the paper, Rashid Soumaila was leading this. And we estimated that there's $35.4 billion being provided globally as subsidies. Out of those, about 10.6 billion are so-called beneficial subsidies. The way we categorize these is based on how these subsidies impact the fish stocks. So how they impact the sustainability of the fish stocks. And beneficial subsidies include investment in fishing in the fish stocks, basically. So these are provided towards management, monitoring, as well as research, marine protected areas, etc. Then we have the so-called ambiguous subsidies, where it's a little bit unclear. So there's $2.5 billion. These can go either way. If they are implemented properly, they can be beneficial, but if they're a bit neglected, or if there's some sort of subsidy towards fisher assistance that actually increases the fishing capacity where already overfishing occurs, then that would be harmful. And then there's the capacity enhancing subsidies, and these are the majority of all the subsidies, with $22.2 billion. This is over 60% of the total subsidies. And these include fuel subsidies, subsidies toward boat reconstructions. So these are all subsidies that are considered harmful to the fish stocks as they increase the risk of overfishing to the fish stocks. And so these are divided further into subtypes. So here, these are all the capacity enhancing, beneficial, as well as the ambiguous subsidies. And as you can see, the fuel subsidies are the largest share out of all of those, with almost $8 billion, followed by fisheries management, which is quite positive, but then followed very tightly by more harmful fisheries subsidies, such as tax exemptions towards fisheries development projects, etc. And so, because we were just very focused here on the World Trade Organization negotiations and not just at the overall pictures, I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit to look into which of these global subsidies are relevant for the negotiations and for the agreement of the World Trade Organization. And so these are 6 categories or 6 types out of the 13 we have that are considered here, which are fuel subsidies, which is kind of self-explanatory. Then there's tax exemptions. We have vessel buyback schemes. This means the government provides money for the fishers to sell their fishing vessels that they don't want to use anymore, which used to be kind of a good idea, because then that meant fishing vessels that wasn't really used anymore, or the fishers didn't want to continue using them, that could be sold back to the governments. But then what happened was then they used the money to buy more modernized fishing vessels, so it would enhance the capacity and would increase the fishing effort rather than decrease it. There's fishing access agreements. Those go to so this is subsidization to the fishing fleet to fish in other countries' territorial waters. There's boat construction and renovation subsidies that are to modernize fishing fleets. So yeah, sometimes it's a little hard with these different types, because there's so many ways governments subsidize the fishing sector. So we really try our best to categorize these and put all these little bits of information into these broader categories to understand it at a more global level. So if you go into each country, there's a lot of more nuances and a lot of more where you say, actually, this might be helpful and this might not be harmful to the fish stocks. But if you look at the overall picture, these are usually harming the fish stocks, especially where there's overfishing already happening. As with these subsidies, the fishers can catch more fish that they wouldn't be able to catch otherwise. And that means they might make a profit where they wouldn't make a profit without the subsidies. And that's kind of the biggest dangerous component here. And then there's fisher assistance, the last one here as well, that can be useful if you need to support the fishing community in some way. But again, if just money is provided from the government to the fishers, then it often obscures what's actually really going on, and especially obscures the economic idea that fishing is useful if it's profitable. But if it's not profitable anymore, then why subsidize it? Why continue overfishing when it's not profitable? So these are in total $17.6 billion. And so I'm going to kind of follow a little bit what Deng and Yannick already showed, and kind of dividing now the subsidies in the different kind of categories, as well in the different development status and components, so you can kind of see how this looks like in the world of subsidies. So these are now the WTO covered subsidies. So I'm just focusing on those $17.6 billion, not on the global that I showed at the beginning. So this is kind of zoomed in, and this is by major region. So you can see Asia has the big share of this. Important to note that out of these 63% of Asia, sorry, this is just kind of blocking. Almost $5 billion is provided by China alone. So just kind of that share of Asia is just a big component. Then there's Europe, North America, South Central America, and the Caribbean is pooled together, Africa and Oceania. that are kind of the smallest amounts here. And then we divided this into development status. So we can see that the developing, so this is information provided from IISD, from the World Trade Organization. So what is considered developed and developing country and least developed country here, just because I remember that was a question earlier. So it's the same that Yannick used, the same categorization, and that Deng, I think, also used for hers. And so developing countries make up 60% of the total subsidies that are provided, then the developed 38%, the least developed only 1.7%, and then the non-WTO members, not even 1%. And what I also did here is what we've been looking at, because sometimes the developed versus the developing status only tells us so much. So we included as well the Human Development Index. So this is based on data from the United Nations, I think from 2019, the latest update. And so here it's divided into 4 groups. So it's the Human Development Index considered very high, provide 50% of fishing subsidies, then the high 43, and then the medium and low groups of the human of the index are only 6 and 1.3%. And so what part of the study that I was leading over the last few years, we updated it, the latest version in 2020, is to look at the subsidies by fishing sector. So we divided into small-scale fisheries and the large-scale fisheries, kind of going back into the definitions we already talked about. What we did here is we focused on each country's definition where that was available. So very, very similar what Yannick did. So if that information was there, that's what was applied. And for countries within the EU where they didn't have their own definition, we used the European Union definition for the member states. And then for the remaining countries that didn't have a definition, we used the sea around us definition that Deng just explained in her catch presentation. So and you can have an idea of how this was done. And so we dug into each of these countries and looked into how much of the subsidies provided to the small scale sector over the large scale sector. And again, this is focused on the WTO covered subsidies. And so 11%, $2 billion goes to the small scale fishing sector, and $15.6 billion, that's almost 90%, goes to the large scale, to the industrial fishing sector. And then I divided this into the 6 fishing types. And here, interesting, you can see the fuel subsidies. It's a very small percentage the small scale sector makes up. So the dark green is the small scale fishing, and the light green turquoise is the large scale, the industrial fisheries. Fishing access agreement, as you can imagine, nothing goes to the small scale sector as they fish within the territorial waters usually. For the vessel buyback schemes as well, very little. Whereas for the fisher assistance, there's a bit of a higher percentage, but in total, it's a smaller amount of the subsidies share. And then we did another split within the small scale and the large scale sector by developing and developed countries. So on the left-hand side, you can see the small scale fisheries, where 0.9, not even 1 billion, goes to the developing countries, and a little bit over 1 billion goes to the developed countries. And then the right-hand side, you can see the industrial, the large scale sector, where there's almost 10 billion coming from developing countries, and a bit over 5 billion from the developed. And then I think important to point out here, so here I just kind of presenting the percentages, and I thought it was interesting to highlight that the small scale fisheries in developing countries make up for around 5% of the total of the 17.6 billion. So it's a very small percentage the small scale fisheries in the developing countries make up. And in these other boxes on the side, you can just see the percentage out of the total 17.6 billion of the others. So there's 6% for the developed small scale, 56% for the developing large scale, and 32% for the developed large scale. Yeah, so this is it for me for data right now. Lots of numbers again. I think lots of numbers today in all the presentations. Just some challenges and caveats of the analysis. It's good to keep in mind that we're trying our best to paint and to show a global image and a global picture. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of lack of data. There's a lot of lack of details and transparency when it comes to how much subsidies the government actually provides and where actually it goes. So while we do a lot of digging and while we look into it very deeply, there's a lot of assumptions we need to make as well. For example, for the sector size between the large and the small scale, we had catch data to help us as a proxy, and that can lead to some biases. Especially regions with very low information include Middle and Western Africa, Western Asia, Micronesia, and Polynesia was a big, just harder to get any information. And then, of course, our databases could be improved dramatically through in-depth analysis and research at regional, national, and local studies. And these are happening as well. And also the lack of data and the transparency is improving. I think an interesting aspect we found out between our, I think it was the 2016 and the 2019 papers, research projects for the update of the subsidies, was that in developing countries, it became more transparent what was going on with the subsidies, whereas in the developed countries, it became a little less transparent what was going on with the data. So, I mean, there's trends happening and things going on, and some countries try really hard and are really helpful, and others not so much. So it's a tricky business. So here's my email address. Feel free to send me messages and ask me any questions on Twitter as well. And thank you very much for your attention.
Super, Anna. Thank you very much indeed. And again, you know, the UBC subsidies estimates are really one of the three main sources of kind of global or multi-region estimates, right? There's the UBC data, there's the OECD's fisheries support estimate, which contains some reported data and some estimates made by consultants, and then there's the WTO notifications, right? And I know that you had a presentation, speaking to those in the audience, you had a presentation of what was notified and the notifications done back in December. And, you know, let's face it, we're up against the reality that subsidies are a specifically sensitive policy tool, and some governments are happy to be transparent about them and many are not. That is just the political reality of the sector we're working in. Okay, Anna, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A for you. And one was about whether there's any differentiation between different types of subsidies, since the idea of the negotiations is to focus on harmful subsidies. I think you may have alluded to this at the beginning, right, in differentiating between beneficial and ambiguous and capacity enhancing. But I wondered whether there was anything you could tell us maybe about how and maybe there was a slide on this and I just missed it. Is there a breakdown of whether, well, do you have a sense of whether different, you know, whether large scale fishing receives more capacity enhancing subsidies or more beneficial subsidies? And I realize this was not the analysis we asked you to do, because we asked you to focus just on the WTO relevant subsidies, right? So this is our judgment as IISD of the kinds of subsidies from the database that would be covered by the WTO agreement. So that's why the numbers are smaller than the totals, and it's why you see, you know, research and development, fisheries management, anything to on-based, to shore-based, land-based activities excluded, because at least in our judgment, that's not what the agreement will focus on in terms of subsidy disciplines. So maybe, Anna, based on some of your older work, can you give us any nuggets of understanding about what kinds of subsidies go to different sectors? And while you think about that, there was another question in the Q&A asking whether in your analysis you had broken down the specific WTO relevant subsidies per country. I kind of assume so, and that you might have used that to build up the global figures that you just gave us, but to check on that. So
yeah, I
some
can.
additional insight. Go ahead.
So the second question is a bit easier.
Yes,
I
let's
can
start with
break
that.
this down to each country as well. I just didn't choose to present it because it gets very messy, and also it's just yeah, then it would be a lot of information. But so online, what we have as like data sets available to just download is the global database. So that's broken down by subsidy types. So then you can just filter out the ones, those 6 relevant ones for the WTO. I'm also happy to just share that if that's of interest. Because it's like the global is there, but because it's by type and we know those 6 types specifically are relevant here for the WTO. So it's very straightforward to show that. And then the other question, so you wanted me to talk about the small scale, large scale, like the division in the sectors, but for the different subsidy categories?
Correct. I mean,
yeah.
if you had a sense.
Yeah. So I can, do you want me to actually I'll just show this real quick, maybe. So here is a, so this shows the big categories, right? So the large scale on the right-hand side is divided into the capacity enhancing, the beneficial and the ambiguous, and then on the left-hand side, the small scale is also divided. So if you can look at the percentages, it's actually not that different between the large scale and the small scale sector. It's still the majority in the small scale sector, almost 60% that goes to capacity enhancing subsidies, and in the industrial sector, it's 64% that goes to the capacity enhancing subsidies, whereas the beneficial are 30 in the industrial, and in the small scale it's 31. So in total numbers, those 64% of the industrial fishing sector is of course the biggest share of the whole thing, right? So here we look at oh, I forgot now the number, but yeah, so the majority of all the subsidies goes to the industrial fishing fleet as capacity enhancing subsidies. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And I guess the next question, but you probably don't have an answer to this specifically, is whether those same proportions are retained when we look only at the WTO relevant subsidies.
Yeah, so the WTO relevant subsidies are only capacity enhancing subsidies.
That's okay.
Right. So then we don't have that share between the ambiguous, so that why we can then look at those 6 subsidy types. And then within those, no, I lost my other presentation here. Within those 6 subsidy types, I showed you the division between the small and the large scale. That was this graph here. So these are the fuel, tax exemption, fishing access, vessel buyback, boat construction renovation. Actually, fisher assistance is the only one that in our categorization, we include this as ambiguous because it could be beneficial, but in most cases, unfortunately, it is not. So sometimes ambiguous can be worse than the capacity enhancing as well. They're just not as clear in our definition, like categorized. But yeah, because there's no beneficial subsidies that are being tackled in the WTO negotiation, then that's...
Okay, super. That's extremely helpful. Thank you. And thank you for digging through some of your older material.
Of course, no problem.
I hope we've answered that question adequately. But if not, it can always be the subject of another webinar. There will be many more. Anna, thank you very much indeed. That's really, really helpful. And thank you for getting up at 7 o'clock on your Friday morning.
No problem.
We're really pushing our speakers in terms of sleep deprivation. So thank you. Perhaps one speaker that isn't going to be sleep deprived this afternoon is our next one, Ernesto, who's based in Washington, DC, as many of you know. Ernesto, would you like to walk us through the Pew Charitable Trust's key data sources? Because I think many of the newer delegates may not even know that these exist, and they might find it helpful to know that they can use these tools online if they'd like to do their own research.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Alice, and thank you for this webinar. I think it's very important to provide this information. I think has been very rich in terms of all the data that the speakers have shared. Yeah, and just to add to the diversity of places, yeah, I'm based in Washington, D.C., but currently I am broadcasting from Costa Rica. So, there you go. Anyway,
Sorry,
let
I
me,
forgot.
no worries. So yeah, I was kind of woke up a little bit early, but that's fine. Let me see if I can share. Let me know if this is working.
Yeah, that's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Can minimize this. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about a couple of resource tools or decision-making tools, as we call them, that we commission, and basically because one of the objectives of the PO engagement, particularly in this field of fisheries subsidies, is to find the right information and data, and we have requested some of the scientists even present here in this webinar to develop this information so we can provide this to the negotiators, to the delegates and ministers, so they can take informed decisions as much as possible. So that's the objective. So these are the two tools that we created, called decision support tools: the Subsidy Explorer, and the Distant Water Fishing Atlas, that I will proceed to explain. And here are the links to the tools. So the first tool, the Subsidy Explorer, was designed by the University of California, Santa Barbara, by Chris Costello and his team, to assess the relative ambition of at a global scale of different WTO proposals, and the text that was submitted. So I think will be, as we will see, they will be still relevant, since there are still topics that members will still will continue negotiating. So the University of California, Santa Barbara were able to estimate the amount of subsidies received by each vessel based on its flag, its size, and the time spent in the water. So the tool is what we call it, one of the kind tool that first it will enable users to compare different subsidy reform proposals that the WTO has considered in the past. And also, secondly, will provide users with other relevant information and helpful data visualization on global fisheries and fisheries subsidies and other fisheries data. The tool is divided into three key sections, all of which can be accessed from this landing page. The first section contains the decision-making section framework for comparing different subsidy reform policies. The second section gives users an opportunity to explore the data underlying the tool. And finally, the third section will be the additional information, the methodology that was used to develop the tool. Now, here in this part, the right-hand side, we see the main finding from the tool, that if WTO members eliminate all harmful subsidies by 2050, it could result in an increase of up to 12.5% of global fishing biomass and 3.5% of global fish catch per year. And just to put this into perspective, you see that this could mean 35 million more tons of fish in the water and 3 million more tons of fish being caught every year. And just to continue put it into perspective, this is more or less the amount, 3 times the amount of fish consumption in North America, and I think 4 times the fish consumption in the whole Africa. At the bottom is you see the link to the paper that was developed underlying all the analysis for this tool that is accessible there. Now, this just as a quick slide just to indicate what are the main data sources for this analysis. And you see the primary data sources are the subsidies data from Rashid Sumaila that was just explained by Anna. The fleet characteristics and behavior from Global Fishing Watch and Global Fisheries Landings from FAO. And there's another elements, including the Anna's analysis on small scale and industrial scale that was included in the as part of the analysis. And just a caveat, I mean, as Alice mentioned earlier, we have been talking here about estimates and their limitations on the data. So you need to when you read and you see this information, you need to consider those limitations. For instance, on Global Fishing Watch, the information that we use for vessel characteristics and behavior, this is taken from vessels that have satellite transmissions from AIS, automatic information systems, and they're mostly from industrial fleets. There is very small from small scale. So the number that we're going to see today in this presentation is basically focusing on industrial fishing. Therefore, the estimates, we always say that are very conservative from that perspective. Now, this is the section that I mentioned that was related to the policy comparison portal in the tool. The first box here on the upper left hand side that you can see is in the box A. The user will be able to select from proposals that have been submitted and pre-populated related to IUU, to overfished and overfishing and overcapacity. And when there's a proposal that has a mix of these 2 or 3, it will also be populated there, and they will be compared to the most ambitious scenario that I mentioned in our previous slide, that 12.5% of global fish biomass increase. So this is what we will be seeing here in the box A, and then the user in box B here on the upper right hand side, the user can design their own proposal as well, taking the information from the different proposals. We have kind of dissected all the different elements, and then you can go in that section, and then you can build your own scenario, your own reform proposal. And then on the bottom left corner, in the box C, you can see how the user can run the global and regional effects of the selected policy and the different biological and economic indicators. So this is that what we will see here. Sorry, and the box D is the last one here at the bottom right corner is you can see the values for the regional also effects of the selected policies. And I'm just going through this real quick. I mean, I forgot to announce at the beginning that we'll be happy to answer any questions, but also if you want to contact us, we can run this with you in a more personal level. We can go deeper into this different sections. The other section that I mentioned, it was the data exploration portal of the tool. This serves to satisfy some of the tool's secondary objective, which is allow the users to view and interact with data on fishery subsidies and in the context of the other fisheries information. In the upper left box, in box A, we explore here the data on subsidies provisioning by country. So if you hover over the different countries, there you will get the information that Anna Shuai was mentioning by country from the estimates from Rashid Sumaila. On the box B, on the upper right corner, we can learn more about the makeup of the fishery subsidies provided by countries, as well as the type of fisheries and demographics, which I think there were some questions about this and are relevant to the discussions at the WTO. So you can explore this by country, including subsidies, marine capture, fisheries, and demographics. Then on the box C in the bottom left corner, we have the box C that the user can compare absolute and relative metrics across countries. You can select top 10 countries by subsidies or by catch or by landed value, for instance, or you can select different countries that you want to compare with. So that's possible. And you can also select that if you want to compare only capacity enhancing or just ambitious subsidies, etc. And finally, we have in the box D at the bottom right corner, here the user can explore the patterns of fishing effort globally. And you can see if you hover over the different FAO high seas areas and the EEZs of each country, you will get the effort information that were taken from Global Fishing Watch. So, and this is to conclude on this first tool. After you select the different policy reform options that have been populated, you can have this global simulation results. And this is just a summary, but you can go to see them individually in the tool. Here in this panel, you can see first the changes in biomass and percentage points relative to business as usual. In business as usual, we mean that there's no reform done at this point. That's the x-axis. Then the changes, that's at the bottom, right? Then we have the changes in catch here on the left, relative also to business as usual for each individual proposal. Also, we can see the changes in fish mortality relative to business as usual. And this is denoted by the size of the dot of the point. And then finally, we have the type of reform proposal that is denoted by the color of the point. So you can see the most ambitious reform is the red one, is at the far right. This is the 12.5% increase in biomass and the 3.5% increase in catch per year. And then you have the different types of proposal, mostly the blue ones that are related to a mixture of reform proposals, including overfishing or capacity, overfish, and IUU, that are performed very well. And then the green ones that are specifically to overfishing or overcapacity that relatively perform very well as well, which will be interesting for the negotiations moving forward to see how or any of these will continue to be relevant in the discussion. So you can see the impact that they will have if members decided to include that in the agreement. And then you have the overfish specific ones that are at the bottom, and this is due to the fact that there's still a lot of limitations on what stocks are considered overfished. And then IUU is very limited as well at the very end of the crossing of the two axes, because this IUU relies mostly on the 150 vessel list that from RFMOs mostly. So based on that list, is the impact for now is very limited. Now I'll move to the second tool that I wanted to introduce today, the Distant Water Fishing Atlas, based also on the analysis from University of California, Santa Barbara. They and because during the negotiations, some of the proposals were about removing subsidies for fishing outside the national jurisdictions. One of those proposals was agreed and is part of Article 5, Article 5.1 of in the final agreement. But we wanted to provide this analysis to the members so they can have more information about the impact of the effort and subsidies in the high seas, and also from the distant water fishing in the exclusive economic zones of third countries. So we commissioned this work to the University of California, Santa Barbara. They developed this tool, to assess the magnitude of the distant water fishing effort based on, again, on the satellite transmission from IIS, from Global Fishing Watch. And then they estimated the subsidy values for the vessels. So I will show you here some visuals from the tool to exemplify the type of information that you can access. First, I choose this exclusive information from the exclusive economic zone of Mauritania. This is only information from vessels, distant water vessels fishing in this exclusive economic zone. And here you can see the different types of information that you can get from the tool, the flag state, the distant water vessels, the number of vessels, the effort estimated by hours, the effort also estimated by kilowatt hours, in the subsidy amount that summarize, that sum all the subsidies that are given to those vessels. And then at the last column, you can see the percentage of those subsidies from the total in this given to distant water fishing in this exclusive economic zone. So for instance, you can see that top 4 countries represent 83% of the total subsidies given to these fleets, to this fleet in this exclusive economic zone. Also, for example, we have the high seas area 41 is the Southwest Atlantic Ocean. You have similar information that you can see, the flag states, the number of vessels, the effort given by hours or kilowatt hours, and then the subsidy amount that is given to these vessels. And we can see here the top 4, the ones inside the red box, represent around 91% of the subsidies given in this area, compared to, maybe it's interesting to compare this to the countries, the neighboring countries of these high seas, that they represent 4.7% of the subsidies. And also, I wanted to highlight this high seas area, because looking at what Tristan presented earlier about the type of RFMOs that exist, there are the specific ones that are mostly have competencies related to tuna and other pelagics, and then there are other RFMO generics that have competencies on other type of stocks. But here in this area, there is one on tuna, but there is none RFMO related to other species, particularly on squid and other mesopelagics. And there is a significant effort on this fishery as well. So there's interest here to maybe for members to apply the agreement, or eventually to also improve management, which could be another effect of the agreement. And then we have following this analysis, just looking at Argentinian exclusive economic zone, we have some of similar actors which represent the top three, 96% of the subsidies in this area. And then finally, in the Pacific, we went to see the exclusive economic zone of Papua New Guinea, and then you see there that the top 5 countries represent about 95.5% of the subsidies given to the vessels that fish in this area. So just a few takeaways. We see some patterns there. Again, similar to the information that we have been seen today related to the big fishing nations and big subsidizers are equally here the most that are engaged in distant water effort, fishing effort. Subsidies could be, obviously known to be contributing to our fishing or capacity, and also illegal fishing and distant water fishing. Foreign vessels encroach onto coast of countries they visit, so competing with domestic efforts. So I think this information that could be valuable to when you use these tools to look how this is impacting countries' domestic fishing. And finally, just eliminating subsidies to distant water fleets or introducing reforms to this will impact the high seas and foreign ECs, which we believe could be a significant objective of the second round of negotiations. And with that, I'll finish and thank you. And again, we'll be happy to if you decide that you want more information, or you can do a specific presentation of these tools and answer specific questions if you desire.
Super. Thank you very much indeed, Ernesto. Again, a lot of information, I know, but I would encourage you, if you're interested in what these data tools can tell you, to go to the 2 websites that Ernesto listed at the beginning of his presentation. The links are right there, and work with the tools and see whether they give you useful information as you think about your positions in the negotiations going forward. Ernesto, I had one tiny clarification question while I wait to see if anyone would like to put anything in the Q&A or put their hands up.
Right.
Everyone's probably exhausted. But just to say, the subsidies information that goes into the Subsidy Explorer that models the impact clearly differentiates between the different kinds of subsidies, right? Because there's the result relating only to the elimination of capacity enhancing subsidies. For the Distant Water Fishing Atlas, the subsidies amounts listed there are the total subsidies, both good and bad, right? As extracted from
both tools follow the same logic as Anna was explaining, that focuses mainly on capacity enhancing subsidies, harmful subsidies. Yeah, it will not. It has not included. Has included all this information, but only related to the harmful ones, not the beneficial.
Not the beneficial ones. Okay. Yep. Good clarification. Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask Ernesto specific questions at this point? You can do it either by raising your hand or in the chat. If everyone is completely exhausted, that's fine. I'll move to the very last summary slide that I promised I'd give you at the end. Pause. Okay, that's fine. I completely understand. It is Friday afternoon or Friday evening for many of you. So let me just show you then really more so that you have a sense of, when you see this slide, which is now on my other screen over here, sorry, when you see this slide at the very end of the pack of slides that we'll send around to all of you, this essentially, as I said before, summarizes in one slide for you all of the different data points that Yannick and Deng and Anna, sorry, Anna gave you, because what we asked them to do was to provide information across a common set of criteria, right? So this summary slide gathers everything that you've heard into one place so you can compare it. And again, I'm not going to walk you all through it. I just wanted to highlight 3 key messages that we thought were important, and you probably gathered these as you went along. First, when you look at the first 3 lines, which divide catch, effort, and subsidies by development status. I mean, what the data, the estimates that we have here show us is that developing members account for the majority of catch and effort and subsidies, although to a smaller percentage. But we've also seen that this overall number reflects the fact that there are a very few developing countries that have very large fleets, right? By comparison, we see that the amounts of catch and effort and subsidies allocated to LDCs are smaller. When you look at the lines in blue, so this divides up catch and effort. We can't do subsidies by maritime area, or at least not from the other two sources we had. When you look at catch and effort, again, by far the largest share of fishing is within domestic exclusive economic zones, which for us means that the way that the rules will apply to subsidies to fishing in domestic exclusive economic zones will be really key in determining the overall impact of these rules. And here again, we see that fishing occurring in developing members EEZs is particularly significant. But remember again, this is due to a few very large developing members who fish very intensively. Now, the high seas proportion here looks like a relatively small or relatively minor proportion, and it is with respect to catch. But again, remember, Tristan was showing us the kinds of RFMOs out there. And in fact, many of the high seas fisheries may be small in tonnage, but actually reflect some of the world's most valuable fisheries, right? Because many of them relate to tuna and to other related and highly migratory species. So by sector, looking at the orange sections at the bottom, the majority of fishing, again, is done by industrial fishing fleets, but artisanal fleets are not insignificant, and the majority of artisanal catch and effort, yes, is done by developing members. But remember again that the level of effort for artisanal fishing is quite a lot higher than the level of catch, right, that those artisanal fisheries take, which makes sense because artisanal fishing generally requires much more time. In general, the picture is of a larger amount of smaller boats taking smaller amounts of catch each. And again, as Anna was telling us, the overwhelming majority of subsidies, at least according to her estimates and her analysis, go to industrial fleets. And I hope we've been relatively clear as we've gone along, and we've asked the speakers to emphasize this, how they've determined what is artisanal and what is industrial. You'll see that there are some commonalities, but there are some differences. And that just comes from the reality that different scientific approaches will work with different sources of data, and for different purposes, even though most of them rely on national definitions, when there isn't a national definition and they have to construct one, sometimes they use different measures. It is the reality of science. I'm going to stop sharing now so that people don't go blind looking at all of those different numbers, but also because we do have a little bit of time now for extra questions, if there are any. And there are a few. So there's a question here. Do any of the tools, maybe this is a question for you, in fact, Ernesto, and I may have missed it in moving too fast to the summary slide, sorry. I think there's a question for you. It's in the question and answer. It says, do any of the tools nuance the effects of harmful subsidies if with the sort of the opposite situation of whether there's fisheries management in place? And this, according to the question here, is one of the central issues for overcapacity and overfishing. And then there's another, so that's a question for you. And then there's a question, I think, which was for, perhaps it might in fact be for Anna, if she's still with us. The last line on the summary slide, and this is all your data again, noted that industrial fisheries get 89% of total subsidies. And the question is, do we have a breakdown in terms of whether those subsidies, that 89% that goes to industrial fisheries, what proportion of that is provided by developing WTO members and what proportion is provided by developing members? And you may have that on the top of your head or not. Do you want to answer that first, and then I'll turn to Ernesto?
Sure. Should I just answer that quickly?
Yeah,
so the in the industrial fleet, out of the 89%, so it's Yes, I have it as percentage of the total. So it's 56% of the 17.6 billion US dollars from the developing and 32% of the total to developed. So that's 10 to the developing, 10 billion to the developing and 5.6 billion to the developed.
That was in your bar chart with the light blue and the dark blue, right?
Yeah. So sorry, I just realized I don't have it as the percentage within. Yes, of the total. Yeah. Sorry. So the 89% make up 56 developing and 32 developed.
Okay, super. Those, at least that's where the subsidies are coming from for industrial fisheries.
Yes.
Super. Good. I think that was exactly the answer we were after. So thank
Okay,
you.
good.
Ernesto, would you like to answer this the other question to the extent you can about, do any of the tools nuance the effect of harmful subsidies if there's fisheries management in place?
Yes, I will be able to give some indication. Can you see the slide?
Yes, although, yeah, exactly. If you can do that, that'll make it bigger. Hit the slideshow. Super.
It's yeah, the University of California, they use there's limited information, but to the extent that there is information, they were able to use it, particularly from the RAM Legacy Stock Assessment database, and also another study from Chris Costello from 2016 on unassessed stocks and status estimates, and also they link this to this Malishek studies from ex-vessel price and fishery management indicators. So they use those studies to be able to the extent possible, apply some management to the subsidy reform proposals and prohibitions and disciplines. So the tool, the Subsidy Explorer tool, thus try to reflect the management to the extent possible. And I'm happy to provide, I think it was Benedicta who answered, I'm happy to provide her with more detail about how they developed that section.
Okay, super. So I guess the answer is yes with respect to the Subsidy Explorer reform
not
modeling tool.
Yes, not the Atlas, because the Atlas we just wanted to see the effort and the subsidies independently of the management. Just want to get those numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Super. There are two other questions in the Q&A. I think they're both to Anna. Do we have any idea of the historical evolution of the shape of subsidies? And you may not have graphs on this prepared, I know, but kind of, comparing, I mean, the original UBC subsidy database started back in 2009. And I'm wondering whether there's anything you can tell us about that historical evolution. The other, sorry, just before I'll give you the other question, because I think it's for you too, I'm afraid. Is there any data that's available sort of geographically at the more micro scale about the percentage of fishers' income that is made up of subsidies? I would hazard a guess as to no, but I might be wrong.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
If we had that. What we did look at in the small and large scale sectors, we looked at number of fishers employed and compared that to the amount of subsidies that provided. So just kind of as an overall global estimate, we show that a fisher that's employed or that's working as a small scale fisher gets 4 times less subsidies compared to a fisher that works in the industrial fishing industry. So that's kind of like, we just try to look at it from like an equity perspective. And we looked at all these different reference points that we could use, and income would have been beautiful to look at and really understand. But we don't have that data in that like global scale. So you would really need to just study at the local scale to find that out, which would be amazing. If we had more of those studies, we could bring that data up and estimate at a larger scale as well. But so at least we could see like the amount of fishers working in small scale fisheries are 4 times less. subsidized in that sense. It doesn't mean they get 4 times less money, because the subsidies, obviously, we're not looking at how much money does the fisher actually get from the government, but what the overall subsidies provided to that sector, and then how many people work in that sector compared to the overall going to the industrial sector, and how many people work in that sector. So that's kind of what we try to look at, if that makes sense.
It does, and it kind of reflects the overall proportions again.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have to be a little careful sometimes, what Dang was explaining earlier, that we don't want to use information to help us estimate the gaps in the information we have, and then use that to compare again. So that kind of circular thing, right?
Yeah.
So we also don't really have any we didn't look at the subsidies by catch necessarily for the small scale sector, because the catch was helpful for us to estimate the subsidies in the first place, where we didn't have any information, right? So it gets tricky. And the historical, so we do for the total subsidies, actually one of our colleagues is working currently and trying to put the really nice history together. So this is not quite ready yet to show, because we have so many gaps, right? We've got the database from 2010 and from 2016 and then from 2019, but there's not much information that's in between. So we're trying a little bit right now to figure that out. And then things have shifted with the categorizations and things like that as well. And then for the small and large scale sector and the divide, that only exists for the 2016. Actually, that was, I think it was data from 2009 originally, and then 2018. So we have those 2 data points that we can compare. But I don't have that right now in front of me. And I can see, I just looked at a graph, like fuel subsidies, for example, the small scale sector has gotten more fuel subsidies and percentage wise from like 2009 to now in 2018.
Okay.
That was an increase, but for the other ones, I can't really tell you right now. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. One thing that's just occurred to me is the data set that might be able to give you a kind of a historical trend. And by you, I mean like anyone who's interested in this question, is in fact, I think the OECD's database, because from memory, they gather their data from OECD members and make their estimates of a few non-OECD members relatively regularly. I'm not sure how regularly, but it'll be more than 2 or 3 data points, right? Which is what we have from the UBC. So that might be, and again, the OECD Fisheries Support Estimates database is very much available. You can download yourself Excel files of the data as the OECD has collected it. It's not global, of course. That's where the UBC data has an advantage, but it does cover a lot of important fishing entities. So for the person asking the question, that might be one other place to look. So I hope you've found this all useful. I know that it's a huge amount of data, hence the attempt to make a summary slide for you. We hope that this has been a useful complement to the data that you had from the WTO's official seminar, and that we hope it's all useful to you, not just what was presented, but the tools where you can use the data yourself. And we hope it's all useful to you as you go into this second phase of negotiations on the rules on subsidies that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Huge thanks to our speakers at the opposite ends of every time zone. You've stayed up late or woken up late to join us, and you've done a lot of background work to provide delegates with useful, relevant and tailored data. So our sincere thanks to you all for doing that.